Hello and welcome back to Talking Europe. The UN chief has called it an epidemic of coups. In Africa, military officers have seized power or attempted to do so in numerous sub-Saharan countries since 2020. Just in the last 2.5 months, soldiers in Gabon announced a takeover of power, and in Niger, members of the Presidential Guard detained President Mohamed Bazoum and also announced that they were seizing power. Supporters of the new regime in Niger waved Russian flags, as did some of those who supported the coup in Mali in 2021. Well, the sight of those Russian flags has been a real punch in the gut for France, which until recently regarded its former colonies as close allies. But the pro-Russian sentiment has also worried the European Union. To delve more into this, I'm joined by Asita Kanko, a Belgian MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists. Welcome to you. And I'm also very pleased to welcome Charles Goerens, a Luxembourgish MEP from the Renew Europe group. Welcome to you as well.
Good afternoon.
Let's have a quick listen to President Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union speech, talking about this succession of African coup and what it means.
Will make the region more unstable for years ahead. Russia is both influencing and benefiting from the crisis, and the region has become fertile ground to the rise of terrorism. This is of direct concern for Europe, for our security and our prosperity. So we need to show the same unity of purpose towards Africa as we have shown towards Ukraine. This is a must. We need to focus on cooperation with legitimate governments and regional organizations. We need to develop a mutually beneficial partnership which focuses on common issues for Europe and Africa.
So, Sita Kekin, when you hear the President of the Commission talk about Russia filling a void, it's a bit more complicated than that, isn't it? Because Russia actually has something that is resonating with people in some of these countries.
Yes, I think indeed it is. It's very important that President von der Leyen highlighted the fact that we need to mind what is going on in the Sahel specifically, just like we have been worried about the Ukrainian situation. However, saying only that Russia is filling a void is oversimplifying the situation. The point here today is that we need to know in September now plenary, we need to know what the EU wants to do, what the EU wants to adjust in its foreign policy, and what it will stop doing, because obviously it does not work. We are not impressing anyone in this region, and Russia is using the propaganda to get some allies in Africa, and this is not only a regional issue. It is a geopolitical one, and this commission failed to be geopolitical.
We'll come back to the whole question of information and disinformation, but Charles Goerens, what about the visibility of the EU in Africa? President von der Leyen there is saying that there has to be the same sort of purpose on Africa as Europe has on Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a real disaster that we have not enough visibility in Africa, given the fact that we are by far the first donor. We have done a lot in order to improve the situation in Africa, overcoming extreme poverty. That's part of the NDICI Global Europe, which is the financing instrument of the European Union in Africa. And the most important part of this NDICI Global Europe for the next 7 years are allocated to Africa. But we have no visibility.
What do you mean by no visibility exactly? What's missing precisely?
Who is Mr. or Mrs. Europe in Africa? Huh? Who is the man or the woman representing Europe in Africa? Of course, we have Jutta Urpilainen, the commissioner,
Borrell, yeah.
But they are not sufficiently perceived as such. And that's, in my view, a real disaster for the European Union. We could do better as far as the 5 coup d'etat are concerned. It's premature to make a definite analysis, but it's not good for Europe. We have to define a new narrative because we are put out by the Russians. Russia today is everywhere, and Europe, and in more particularly France is no longer tolerated in several African countries. That's not good.
We saw the former head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. He actually, his holdings company invested a lot in media and trying to shape narratives. This is one area where Europe is clearly not doing as much as it could.
Yeah, that's true. I think Europe should invest more in its own communication channels, and besides, invest less in financing dictatorship in Africa, because that is what is feeding the beast. If you give, like, indeed we are giving a lot of money to Africa, but from what I see, where does this money go, and why did nothing change since the 70s? Nothing changed, so it's not working. When something is not working, you need to change your strategy. So you cannot solve all the problems by giving money. Maybe sometimes it's by doing something else, or by not giving money to that specific person. That is also like something we need to think about. So investing in the communication is very important. When I was growing up in Burkina Faso, I was listening a lot to Radio France Internationale. Without RFI, I wouldn't have been aware of what is going on in the world, because I would listen only to national propaganda on the national channel. I think it brought something new and taught me to be critical in the way I view the world. And I was not the only kid who also listened to the radio. We need to not underestimate what media from the West is doing in Africa, and also who is speaking on them, who is representing us. And I totally agree with my colleague that we are weak on that side. We don't see. We don't seem to be impressed, and nobody there seems to be impressed by what the EU has to offer. And sometimes when you speak, you only do the same things, like what we are doing now. We are not triggering any form of respect. I think nobody is respecting us, and Russians and Chinese are not impressed either, and tomorrow will be a minority on the global stage.
Question of respect is actually kind of key, isn't it? And maybe if you could we could address the whole China question as well that Asita brought up with you.
Well, I used to be a Minister of Development Cooperation. In that capacity, I had strong links with Namibia, with Cape Verde, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. And this partnership was based on a real partnership. We never undertook anything that was not in line with the expectations of the Africans. That's real partnership. I see that China is very successful because they are supposed to refuse all conditionality. They don't ask the Africans to accept any conditions concerning respect of human rights. But if I see what is written, laid down in the African Charter of the African Union, they share the same values than those that are enshrined in the European Charter for Human Rights. It's part of the European values. We are on the same level. We share the same values. And I do not understand why we are not better accepted by the Africans. In my view, we should make some very clear new propositions. As far as security is concerned, I can no longer admit that Africa, with more than 1 billion people, is not represented in the Security Council of the United Nations. The European Union should be the first pleading for this request. Second, why don't we explore ways to establish an European-African free trade zone that could be a source of prosperity, of cooperation, of new industrialization in Africa? No single country, as far as I know, had reached prosperity without passing through a very bold period of industrialization.
Yes. Yeah, but we always hear from the EU talk about instruments, whether it's free trade, the post-Cotonou agreement, and yet persistently one hears, for example, young Malians, the people I mentioned who were holding up Russian flags in 2021, just it doesn't seem to be registering. When they hear France saying, well, we only intervened in Mali because the Malian government asked us to, we're not, going around or over the heads of anybody, they just don't hear it. They're hearing something different, it seems.
But you know, the saying that a hungry man is an angry man is also true.
The hungry man is an angry man.
Yes, I mean, we're not realistic. Sometimes, what do you want people to do when they wake up in the morning? To eat charters and to eat words, so that the day will, the stomach will be full and they'll have a beautiful day and be able to think and reflect about society. Yeah. The first thing you need is security, and you also need to be able to feed your children. So indeed, I agree with the economic aspect. I believe very strongly in that, but I also believe in the security aspect and being able to have something to speak about. Otherwise, these young people that we see, they did not receive anything else, and they are also distracted by the fact that they do not have a job, they do not have a place where they can go and focus on their own lives. And when we continue giving money to dictators who are actually keeping this situation, then they will be outside dancing when there is a coup d'etat, because believe me, some kids even don't know that there is another way to change president without having a coup d'etat, because the guys just stay there forever. This is very sad, but if we invest more in sustainable ways of developing, instead of just giving blank checks, we are going to achieve real change, but it requires that we step out of our comfort zone and that we give dignity and respect and not arrogance and patronizing others. This is how we're going to be able. It's also good for our companies to have partners, and let's have them have a very good accounting system with data that you can find, because otherwise you cannot trade.
We'll have to end it there. So sorry that we've run out of time, but thank you to both of my guests, Charles Guérens and Asita Kanko, and that's all for this edition of Talking Europe. I'll be back soon for another show from the European Parliament.